Welcome to Big Business This Week. I'm JD Durkin here on the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange. We are, of course, as always, tracking the biggest stories shaping the world of markets, money, and business. And this week, between turbulent trade policy and tariffs impacting Thanksgiving groceries, as well as Black Friday shopping, the supply chain pressures, there is so much to talk about. And let's bring in Ana Swanson now. She is a trade and international economics reporter for the New York Times to help us make sense of a dizzying week that has been in the world of news and beyond. Ana, welcome to the show. Nice to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we're now are talking a lot about with Thanksgiving holiday just days away somehow already, impossibly, it's just days away. How are we seeing tariff pressures, pricing pressures more broadly impact year over year grocery shopping for families ahead of the Thanksgiving holiday?
So, the impact of tariffs on food prices has been a big topic lately. You saw the administration introduce some exemptions to tariffs in an effort to bring that down. Honestly, stepping back, I think tariffs have added a little bit to food prices this year. They're probably not the overwhelming factor. I do have some questions about whether the administration offering these exemptions to certain food products like coffee or bananas, how effective that's going to be. I think it could help here and there, but I'm not sure how much it's going to bring the price down. There was an interesting interaction recently with the White House trumpeting that the Trump administration had actually brought down the cost of a Thanksgiving dinner, saying that a holiday feast is about 3% cheaper than last year. That went through a lot of different fact checks, and was found to be kind of misleading because the Trump administration here was pointing to a specific Thanksgiving dinner that Walmart, puts together and saying that that is cheaper than it was last year, but Walmart assembles that from, different food components that it chooses in order to be, cost effective, and it actually the basket that they chose this year, contained quite a few 6 fewer items than it did last year, so it's a small basket. It may be cheaper, but it's a smaller basket overall. So, stepping back, the cost of food at home, in the inflation report is up 2.7% from a year ago. Those are increases that people do feel, especially given that they're coming from a higher base and concerns about affordability last year as well.
Anna, how much more difficult is it to give us an actual apples to apples or at least year over year comparison, given that a lot of that economic data we rely on has been harder to come by? And we just found out that although we finally got the September prints for jobs, October and November are going to be blended together, which tells us a certain portrait of wages. And obviously, we've not had the regular drumbeat of CPI and PPI type inflation prints, given how long the shutdown was. Does that make all this a bit more difficult to calculate for this particular holiday season?
Absolutely. I mean, the economy has been kind of a moving target, and to not have that really important data giving us a window into what actually has been going on has added just another intense layer of confusion to looking at all of it. And you're right. The White House did say recently that it's putting out some of the data late, so we won't get that October report until later than we would normally. And also, there won't be an unemployment rate in that October data because that's due to household surveys that you basically can't conduct after the fact. So I do think, we're looking at um, a very kind of impaired vision of the economy at a time when people are trying to figure out what's going on for the holiday, and the Federal Reserve is also trying to decide what to do about interest rates.
Yeah, at least the jobs data we did get showed us unemployment ticking up to 4.4%. That might be, to your point, the only print we have here for a while, maybe into 2026, really. You mentioned coffee, you mentioned a few other items earlier. Are we seeing price pressures on all holiday foods or particular categories more so than others?
Yeah, so price increases have been uneven. It really depends on the food product. You've seen really substantial increases in products like beef and coffee, not necessarily things you're going to have on your Thanksgiving table. The price of coffee, for example, has risen nearly 19% this year. That is one that I do think could be feeling the burden of tariffs because We've had a 50% tariff on products coming in from Brazil, which is, of course, a major source of coffee, 20% tariffs on Vietnam. So it's possible that the tariff exemptions that the White House just announced will help relieve some of the pressure in specific categories like that, but they're pretty targeted and, not so much across the board going to affect the overall price of your groceries.
What are the expectations, if there are any, for tariff-related pricing pressures to continue into 2026? We had a big conversation this year around the Liberation Day lows of the stock market in April to wonder if and when we would really see tariff uncertainty work its way through. Once we get past this slate here for Q4, is that a distant memory, or is that something we need to still keep a finger on the pulse of into next year?
Yeah. No, actually, I do expect companies to be more and more willing over time to pass the cost of tariffs through to their consumers. And there are a few reasons why that has been kind of slow to take effect. We saw, tariffs announced going into effect throughout this year, but a lot of companies were able to hold off on raising prices, in part because they had done a lot of stockpiling before the tariffs came into effect. They were able to, work through that old inventory, in part because supply chains just take a while. It takes a long time for goods to, move from those Chinese factories across the ocean into American warehouses, into the stores. Another important reason is that companies have been kind of nervous about the economy and the extent to which consumers will bear price increases. So they've been kind of cautious and scoping out what their competitors are going to do in this area, waiting to see if others are raising prices as well before they move ahead. But I think as time goes on, all of those factors continue to add up to companies being more likely to increase prices. I should also note, though, that not increasing prices is not the only response that companies can have, right? So a lot of times you'll see what we call shrinkflation. So companies actually reducing the amount of product in the packaging instead of increasing the prices. You might see reductions in product quality. A lot of what companies have done this year in response to tariffs actually is cutting back on some more kind of optional product lines that might be lower margin and just concentrating in like core product segments. So I was talking to a company the other day that makes artificial Christmas trees and Christmas decorations. This year they're not selling snow globes. They're concentrating on one type of tree. So there are a lot of other decisions that companies can make in to respond to tariffs, but basically they all shake out to this kind of you know, less optimal experience for the American consumer as we go into the holidays, whether it's the quality of the product or the higher price or a lack of, more options available for you when you're doing your shopping.
Yeah, I mean, as if the general cost of food weren't big enough, and obviously that's a huge expense for the average American family, especially this time of year. We also have what's historically a surge in the purchase in big ticket items, can be toys, can be electronics. These are the type of products whose core components oftentimes come from other countries. What will you be looking for in terms of potential price increases or pressures for consumers, even as they shop, for Black Friday and beyond during the heart of the holiday shopping season?
Yeah, you're right. A lot of the big ticket items, electronics, toys, sports equipment, things like that, we're heavily dependent on foreign sources for. So a lot of those goods are coming from China, often from other countries, Southeast Asia, Mexico as well. The Trump administration did strike a deal with China where it reduced the tariffs on items coming from that country somewhat, but they're still pretty high. And so I do think those are translating to, more costs and some less product availability for consumers as they're going into the holiday. The Trump administration's goal, of course, is to encourage manufacturing to come back into the United States. But, talking to companies that make things like, toys, apparel, I still just sense a lot of reluctance to do that, just kind of more willingness just to eat the tariff, saying that the cost of production overseas is just so much lower. Of course, that's not true in every case. There are some American toy makers and shoemakers, but, not too many out there compared to the volume of goods that people will be buying over the holidays.
Are we expecting a shift in consumer behavior at all due to higher than expected holiday prices? And does history give us any gauge about where they may pull back on some of that discretionary spending? And I ask because we're on the backdrop of a longer running narrative this year of the difference between the so-called soft data and the hard data. The soft data being things like sentiment surveys, people telling us how they feel about their personal economic situation, which oftentimes, when you look at the hard data, like their actual spending, sometimes tells us a little bit of a different story.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, the forecasts I've seen for holiday sales this year, for example, for Black Friday, seeing that it's still expected to be up, 7 to 9% over last year. I did see that the National Retail Federation was projecting that overall holiday sales would be up about 4%. So still, you're still looking at growth from last year. I think the question is more just about the degree and the degree of enthusiasm for the American consumer. I mean, Americans are shoppers and they're going to fill their carts and, have things under the tree, but we are sensing, some more caution from American buyers that could result in lower purchases, particularly of discretionary items, of higher cost items. And talking to company owners, I think there's also just a lot of uncertainty going into this period. Will Black Friday be big enough that, you could see some shortages of items, or, will there be enough availability so you have products on the store shelves? We really just kind of have to wait and see for some of that.
More broadly, Anna, because I know you cover the space very closely, how would you describe the general state of trade in the United States with our crucial trade partners after what has been such a tumultuous year where we have used the word uncertainty probably a few too many times to describe the state of trade?
Yeah. So, it really has been kind of a wild year. I just wrote up the trade data that we got for August. Again, those data releases have been delayed because of the government shutdown. And so, it's really interesting because this year, as we've seen tariffs announced and then delayed and then reintroduced, brought down, brought up, it's really just resulted in a lot of volatility for companies, and companies trying to kind of game the system by bringing in products ahead of time, and then when the tariffs come into effect, pausing their purchases. So I really wouldn't even say, overall looking at this year, the trade is down so much. It's just really that it's been like kind of this roller coaster for companies of, trying to buy things in advance and then pausing purchases. So it's been really interesting to see that overall, for example, the U.S. trade deficit this year through August is still up 25% from last year. So, the president talks about this goal of bringing the trade deficit down. That hasn't happened yet, actually, because companies were really trying to get ahead of those movements and do so much of that purchasing. But since we saw the big Liberation Day tariffs go into effect, I mean, that definitely weighs on trade. It weighs on what companies are able to bring into the country. You have seen some other partner economies that are really hurting as a result too. Canada, Japan, other countries just really feeling the pain of this trade slowdown with the United States from tariffs. I guess I could add that just as a final note, what I'm really watching right now is the administration going to be kind of backing away from some of this tariff posture? So as I said, they did announce some exemptions. Are we going to see more of that? Have we hit the high water mark in terms of tariffs and we're, going to go downhill now, or could this all come kind of with a vengeance in the new year?
Well, that's why it's so important to have Truth Social notifications set for our phones, because oftentimes that's how trade policy gets announced, right? They are
Absolutely.
essentially tweets and social media posts by the president, and that sort of establishes trade policy. A fantastic conversation at a really important time. My special thanks to our special guest today, Ana Swanson, trade and international economics reporter for the New York Times. Ana, thank you.
Thanks for having me.